Lockdown. So, but look, we'll get over it, I suppose. So yes, I just want to give a little brief rundown of some of the tips and tricks for using Zoom. I'm sure plenty of us are more than used to using Zoom by now, but just in case you're not familiar with it, couple of notes for you in relation to today's event. So you'll have noticed when you joined the meeting this morning, you were popped onto mute and we're keeping videos off. So we have, I think, over 120 people in the room this morning. So just to reduce distractions, we're all staying on mute, apart from our panelists and our speakers, and just keeping videos off, just to reduce distractions and make connections a little bit easier as well in terms of streaming and so on. And so those, if you need to turn off your mic or your video at any point, if you go down to the bottom left-hand corner, the little mic and camera icon there will let you select to turn those off. Also, myself and some of my colleagues from the wheel are here in a sort of host capacity on Zoom, and we're able to turn off those features for you. So just to let you know, if you do find that your video magically turns off, that's us at work there in the background. Just to bring to your attention, like I said, the room, the numbers are growing as I'm going through this presentation. We've got lots of people in the room here, and with those videos off, you might want to have a look at the participants list. So that's this icon down here, and the little sort of outline of a person will generate a participants list on the right-hand side of your screen, which you can have a look through to see who else is here in the room with us today. I'll bring your attention to the chat box function also. That's the little speech icon down there at the bottom of the screen. So the chat box will generate, either it'll pop out or it'll appear on the right hand side of your screen there. And we're asking if you're having any technical issues with Zoom or your device today, if you can pop any concerns you might have in there in relation to using Zoom, and myself and my colleagues will be monitoring that throughout the morning, just to make sure to try and increase your enjoyment of the morning. So any issues you have with tech can go in there. In relation to questions for the speakers, I'll come to that in a moment, but just to let you know. And two really good tips that we've learned over the last 3 months, I suppose. The view can be changed up here in the top right-hand corner. So what you can see on my screen that I'm sharing here is a screenshot of a large conversation with a number of people. That's the gallery view, which I call the Brady Bunch view. You can change that to speaker view, where Zoom just picks up on the mic that's making the most noise. So in this case, it would be me, and maximizes that screen. So a focus on the speaker there if you change to the speaker view. And a great little tip, if you hover over your own name, so once I stop sharing my screen, this will be a little bit easier for you. So when your video is off, or anyone else in the room who has their video off, if you hover over the little box with their name in it, click on the 3 dots in the right hand corner up here, that'll generate a menu. And you can click down the bottom, it says hide non-video participants. So if you do that, it'll clean up the screen really nicely for you, and all you'll be able to see are the speakers on the screen at one point. It'll hide all those little boxes with our names in them. It just makes it a little bit easier to see who's speaking, to focus on the content, I suppose. Moving on. Like I mentioned, the chat box is there for any technical issues that you might have. So if you can't hear properly or see the screens or so on, please do pop your concerns into that chat box, and my colleagues and I will do our best to support you there. Questions that you might have for our speakers, they can go to my colleague Johnny Sheehan by email, and what he'll do is he'll put together a list of questions for the speakers, just to make it a little bit flow a little bit easier, I suppose, throughout the morning, as we have so many people here, so we're anticipating a lot of questions. His email address, if you want to jot it down now, is johnny@wheel.ie, so that's JOHNNY@wheel.ie. And just to let you know that we will be recording today's session, so we'll be able to follow up with the recording of the entire morning's proceedings afterwards by email. And we'll be sending on all of the slides that you see in use as well. So if there's anything that you missed, you will be getting it in a follow-up email also. And if you would like to share your experience on social media today, please, you're most welcome to do so. We encourage it, and we are using the hashtag Charity Summit. That's hashtag Charity Summit. So if you'd like to share your experience, please do. And I will be, I'll just leave that. I'll leave that slide back up there for a second. I will be seeing you again in about an hour's time. We'll be doing some breakout groups then, and I'll just be popping you into those. You don't need to worry about anything. I'll walk you through that at the time. And for now, I will hand you over to my colleague, Elizabeth Bolger. So thank you.
Unmute. Lovely. Thank you, Sinead. And good morning, everybody. I have to say, one of the positives, I suppose, when I see all the greetings and good morning in the chat box, which is really lovely to see, and the fact that so many, can we just remind people to switch to put themselves on mute? Great, thank you. Yeah, it's lovely to see in the chat box the regional people from all different parts of the country. So one really big advantage, I think, of the lockdown and doing our training virtually, that's lovely. So it's lovely to see that this morning, and you're all very, very welcome. Okay, so this morning, our second in our summit series, putting our values where our people are. We have a further two in our series. Tomorrow we have Exploring EU Values tomorrow morning, and our final event in our summit series is this day next week, the 24th of June. The future is community. So I would encourage you, if you have the time and if you haven't already registered for those, I think they're a real space for learning and thinking and some discussions. So do sign up to those. So coming back to this morning's event, this particular one, it's actually linked with we do this on an annual-ish basis, our rewards, recognition and well-being seminars, and they are linked with the National Pay and Benefit Survey, and we do them in association with the Community Foundation for Ireland, who support the Pay and Benefit Survey, and we work very closely with them. So this event was scheduled anyway, because the most recent survey was published at the end of last year. And of course, with COVID, as with all of you, you know, the first week, the first couple of weeks, everything changed. Oh my gosh, we'll have to cancel things, etc., etc. And then little by little, we realized that no, it's just about adapting and changing. So this event was in place anyway, and it now feels so pertinent, so relevant in terms of the current context and climate. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from our various speakers, and I will introduce all of those in a moment. In terms of, I suppose, just where we are, the challenges, and I think we're all challenged, some very similar broad challenges, personally, individually, our organizations, our sector, some very specific challenges. And obviously we all approach these and deal with them in different ways. So it's really, really important for us as organizations to just really be cognizant of that. The whole area of staff well-being, this whole crisis, it's all about people. I mean, people is in the center of this. So HR more than ever is just of critical importance during this crisis. And we always knew it was a key strategically important area, but we're really clear on it now. The importance of open communication, that big challenge of, we always, when we're approaching a new project or something like, we have a benchmark, we look to others, there is somebody, there's, a how-to guide, but we've all realized there's no how-to guide to managing in a COVID crisis. So it's really been learning by doing, learning by not doing, learning by not knowing. And I think the whole openness about that, about making decisions that may need to be changed, being flexible, people understanding why decisions are being made. I mean, for everybody, we can see it from the government down in terms of their challenges on various very large decisions that had to be made and how they impact on society as a whole. But I think being open and communications, all of those are so important. So a lot of these issues will be discussed today. And as I said, we have a great panel of speakers lined up. So I will then very quickly just run through the agenda. Thank you, Lauren. Following myself, Hazel Hennessy will do an introduction and will speak about from the Community Foundation for Ireland about that support and the work that we will be continuing to do with them in this area. Denise Charlton will follow Hazel. Denise is working with Denise Charlton Associates and has a lot of years experience within the sector, is currently working as a coach, but will have so much to share and will be an excellent facilitator of our panel discussion. Then our 4 panelists, Derek McKay, Managing Director of Adair HR. So obviously from an employment law perspective, a lot of learnings and advice about regulation, about recommendations, and Adair are working very closely with us on a lot of HR supports and webinars that are funded through a very generous Medtronic COVID emergency fund. So there'll be a lot of learnings from Derek. Derek will be followed by Geraldine Anderson. Geraldine is the head of research with IBEC. And her role here today is she is also co-author, along with Quality Matters, of the most recent National Pay and Benefit Survey. So Geraldine will briefly touch on some of the key findings from the survey and just then speak a little bit wider about how that would relate a bit with where we are currently. Following Geraldine, we'll actually have Peter Mcbride. The agenda is 3-4 turned around. So Peter Mcbride, up to very recently, Peter was the CEO of Inspire Wellbeing, which is a very large all-Ireland organisation that has a big focus on employee wellbeing. They actually deliver quite a number of employee assistance programs, including one that we have with the Wheel. So obviously Peter will have a lot of learnings to share in terms of the area of wellbeing. And then Tracy Keogh will follow Peter. Tracy is a co-founder and interim CEO of Grow Remote. And Grow Remote for the past number of years have been strong advocates of the whole area of remote working. So Tracy will share with us their learnings, the challenges, how to overcome some of those challenges in relation to remote working. So I think it's a really excellent lineup of speakers, and I think some really good learnings for us all there and some tips and advice. We will then split up, as Sinead said, into groups, smaller groups, where we will just be able to share some of our own learnings and experiences and challenges, which is always so beneficial at any sessions like this. During the panelists, as Sinead had mentioned, discussions, there will be opportunity. If we could encourage you, if you have any questions, do email those to my colleague Johnny@wheel.ie, and those questions will be pulled together during what year at the small breakouts. The panel will be reviewing those questions. And then Denise, after we all come back to the full session, Denise will facilitate the 4 speakers in a panel discussion. And then we will definitely be done and dusted by 12:30. With, I'm sure, some insights, some affirmations that what we have been doing is what other people are doing, and it's good or bad, or how other people have found it. But I think we will definitely get a lot from this morning. So that is me. Thank you again for taking part and for joining us. And I will hand over to Hazel.
So thank you very much, Elizabeth, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak at the webinar and to represent the Community Foundation for Ireland. So as many of you know, we are a philanthropy organisation that provides funding to the non-profit sector. We started in 2000, and since then we've given out over 50 million to the non-profit sector in Ireland and abroad. And one section of this grant making over the last number of years that we've really focused on is capacity building within the non-profit sector. So we've done this in a number of ways. We have started our annual reporting grants, grants for mergers, leadership grants, and we also provide research grants such as to the 2 into 3 fundraising report. So to add to this section, in 2015 we started the Pay and Benefit series, which is actually a follow-up from the Wheels 2008 National Survey on Pay and Benefits in community, voluntary and charitable organisations in Ireland. So basically the Pay and Benefit survey reports everything from rates of pay across the sector to conditions of employment, which includes pension scheme, paid leave, and other employment benefits. And we really see it as an essential resource to the growth of the non-profit sector within Ireland. As a supplement to the main Pay and Benefit survey, we've also conducted 2 separate research reports using the data from the survey. So the first one looks at how organisations are faring in post-recessionary times. And the second one then is a gender pay gap analysis within the non-profit sector. And just to mention, if you want to read any of these reports, they're all available to download on our website, which is communityfoundation.ie. So looking to the future of the Pay and Benefit series, we are delighted to be able to say that we are partnering with the Wheel for the next Pay and Benefit series in 2021. We will be providing a grant to the Wheel to produce the survey, as we feel as sector leaders and the representative body that they're really in the best position to do so. So in the last survey in 2019, there was 346 organisations that supplied their pay and benefits data. And we really hope that we can grow this number to include as many organisations as possible. As the more data we have, then the more robust the findings will be. And I know Geraldine is speaking later on kind of the more nuances of the report. So looking at the other subsectors of the subsections of the survey, we also provided a grant to the Wheel, who are going to produce a follow-up gender pay gap analysis within the non-profit sector. And this is actually going to be launched later this year. This is a subsection of the report that we do feel very passionate about. It was started in 2015, so we have 2015 data and 2017 data. So it would be fantastic to be able to have the 2019 data, because as the summary from the last gender pay gap analysis shown, there's actually a higher gender pay gap in the non-profit sector than in the for-profit sector. So it's really important that we continue to track this data and look at ways that we can inform future strategies to remedy this. So within the Community Foundation for Ireland, we will continue to make funding available for capacity building within the non-profit sector. As Elizabeth said, since COVID-19, the demands on the sector have increased hugely. So it's really important that the support is there so that we can all continue to uphold the highest standards of governance and ensure that those working within the sector are provided the skills and resources they need to meet these ongoing demands. So that's it for me. It was just a very quick introduction. Geraldine is going to go into the report later on. And so thank you again to the Wheel for hosting this webinar. And we really look forward to working with the Wheel to see what the next stage of the survey is going to look like. And it's going to be a fantastic lineup today. So I'm really interested to stay on and learn from all the speakers today. So enjoy the rest of the day. And I'm going to hand you over now to Denise.
Morning, everybody. I don't think people can see me. Can you?
No, we can't see you, Denise.
Okay, it's just saying the host. Oh, no, now it will. Hi, morning, everybody. Lovely to be with you here this morning. Firstly, I want to say a couple of thank yous. A big thank you to the Wheel and to Community Foundation of Ireland. My experience at the Wheel is that they are always at the cutting edge of thought leadership, the provision of primary data to inform that thought leadership, and then really practical supports that can help us in our thinking and our considerations. And this morning, I think, is no exception to that. So to thank them for putting together this brilliant panel of experts in such a timely fashion when all of us are trying to grapple with many of the issues that we'll be discussing this morning. I'm really delighted to be the MC today, and my role really is to facilitate the conversation, to keep people to time. I'll let the speakers know 2 minutes before their time is up. I'll let them know when their time is up. And then I have a tendency of speakers to go over to start singing. I do that extremely badly. So I'm sure none of the speakers will want the participants to have to endure my awful ballad, and they will stick to time. Just a couple of comments, I suppose, before I hand over to the speakers. I don't need to tell anybody who's listening this morning the unprecedented times that we're in, and the challenges to our sector, particularly to all sectors, but particularly to ours. And as Elizabeth has said, it's never been so important to have a focus on a healthy workplace and positive and engaged workers and volunteers. And I suppose that's always been important. And as she said, HR is really central to that, but so is leadership. And obviously those are interconnected. And we find ourselves, I think, as leaders in this sector and as organisations, really trying to think about how best we can continue to serve those that we work with. It's incredible, I think, at the moment how we've witnessed, you know, that unimaginable shifts in our daily lives, how they have, I suppose, have compelled us as organisations to adapt really quickly and creatively, and in some ways unconventionally, to continue to do the work that we do to operate and survive. The sector, so the challenge to the sector is well documented. Again, the Wheels conference only a couple of weeks ago highlighted the huge decrease in finances to the sector, I think around 400 million guesstimate. And we know that people are trying to work from home, they're trying to work without childcare. Many are providing services to very vulnerable service users from their home. You know, there's huge financial challenges, some of the organisations not knowing about their future. People at home will have lost loved ones because of COVID-19, maybe have underlying health conditions themselves, high levels of anxiety. So there are huge challenge for us as a sector as we go forward and respond to COVID-19. Interesting enough, there was a recent study of world leaders, and always looking to New Zealand again and the great leadership there, and talking about the three components in a crisis. The first, the capacity to respond. The second, then, the capacity to recover. And then the third, the capacity or the intention to thrive. And a common theme among those leaders was being led by expertise, mobilizing collective efforts, and enabling coping. And for me, that really summed up what we're trying to do today. Listen to the experts who've been thinking and learning from the experience of the pandemic, and mobilizing our collective efforts and enabling coping. John Hilliard has a great book on leadership that I would highly recommend, and it's entitled, which I thought was fitting for today, What Happens Now? And the book's core argument really is that no matter how effective we are yesterday, it is today and tomorrow and the challenges that they throw up that really makes us effective at all. And that if we don't reinvent ourselves all the time and adapt, that we'll stall and fail. And really, I think never has that been more evident than today. I think, though, it's very important that we recognise the challenges, but we also recognise the incredible response from our sector, the ability to respond and change operational models nearly overnight, and the capacity to provide services to really vulnerable service users across the country. You're all doing that in so many ways. Listening to organisations across the country where, you know, reports of really high output, strategic thinking, capacity and organisational development, really creative work, innovative work, employees and volunteers together, really stepping above the plate, as always, I think, in our sector. So how do we continue as we now do a phased return to the workplace? How do we move from the crisis response phase into the recover and hopefully the thrive phase? Even though for many of us, the organisation, survival is what we're thinking about and not necessarily thriving. But how do we take the positives from the recent crisis and bring it to the next phase? Accenture have done a lot of work on the future of work and how, you know, we're all going to be affected by that, animation, etc. And they would now advocate that we've actually been accelerated along that path in a way that maybe we wouldn't have envisaged. And what are the implications of that for all of us as well? So I really welcome this morning discussion, the practical about, you know, how we've responded, as Elizabeth says, what we can learn so far, what are the challenges ahead. Really looking forward to our panel of experts who are thought leaders in their area and can really share that thought leadership as well as practical supports, and really look forward to your questions and hearing the panelists grapple with them and your experiences. So without further ado, I will hand over to our first panelist. Elizabeth has already introduced them. You have their biogs. So Derek, I'll hand over to you.
Great, good morning. Thanks very much, Denise, and thanks to the Wheel and the Community Foundation of Ireland for inviting me here to speak this morning. I've participated in previous reward and recognition sessions, but I think it's fair to say that the content for today is a lot different, and certainly even a lot different than if we were having this session, planning it in February. So very much a sign of the times, and a sign of the times that we're obviously online for the session as well. So really my focus is today is to cover, I suppose, a number of key areas. It's great to hear, I suppose, two people already talk about, as I wrote it down there, HR is central to us going forward. So I have noted that down, and I'll be quoting that back to people. And if people undervalue HR in the future, which I don't think they will, because I do think, as the focus is today about putting our values where our people are, it enables us to ensure that we are keeping, as we normally would, but keeping people front and centre to this. So as I was reflecting on today and in preparation for today's discussions, one of the things that came to light was I was on a recent session, and the question was posed about leaving a legacy, and leaving a legacy in terms of how we've managed the crisis. And very much through, as I would look through the lens of the organisation and HR, when we look back over the last 3 or 4 months, and then when we look back on the longer term, you know, what decisions did we make? How effective were those decisions? Probably more importantly, what decisions didn't we make that we should have made? And really, what's the impact? And what changes do we need to do, and what changes have we kept? So really, at the back of your minds, I would encourage you to think about that in terms of, as we fast forward through this, and pace is obviously of significant challenge for organizations, but we fast forward ourselves 6, 12, 18 months time, we're looking back on that legacy of how we've hopefully effectively managed as best we can the challenges that this has brought about. We want to look back at it in a positive light, and it doesn't mean that there's not going to be more challenges, more decisions, more difficulties, but certainly let's keep the focus in on making those decisions and look through the lens from a HR perspective. So I absolutely acknowledge that the impact that this has had and still will have can be positive, negative, and both and unintended as well. So my part for today is really kind of drawn upon what we're doing, talking to organizations upon, that the pace of change is happening, what we're told is 12 times quicker. So in terms of where we're at now compared to, you know, a normal recession, if there is such a thing, it's 12 times quicker. So if it's 12 times quicker, then we ask ourselves, do we need to make decisions 12 times quicker as well? What those decisions are. And I suppose we've got parameters around them, phased return to work, government protocols, all those sort of things. But I really want us to start talking about moving out of this emergency, needs must decision making into more planned, medium-term decision making, and as someone said before to me, control the controllables and plan for the others. So, you know, for today, it's let's get that focus in really through that HR and organizational lens. And in the context of that, even the work that we're doing, and we are rolling out a pulse survey to 65 staff in an organisation tomorrow. That's about their return to work, the concerns, the considerations, the challenges. That was first floated on Monday morning. And we're Wednesday now with a draft set of questions to be signed off by their senior team today to enable us to finish it and go live tomorrow. That normally, normal terms for us, would allow for 3 weeks of communications, lead-in time, minimum, all that sort of stuff would be part of our process and even theirs. So we've gone from 3 weeks to 3 days because the benefit of doing it in 3 weeks, 4 weeks time is lost or significantly decreased. So it is right by the organisation, it's right by the staff and the organisation, because what they're trying to do is come up with a plan. They're trying to create a level of certainty in uncertain times. So they know it's the right thing to do. And I'm sure it'll be said several times today, done is better than perfect, that sort of language that has been used. And I agree in this case that now to get something there, get more information to feed into the HR plans and practices is very relevant. So I think organisations have been in this holding pattern and, you know, waiting for decisions to be made at government level, seeing what's happening across the economy, across the sector. That's not going away. It's being sped up. Different things are happening, but it's not a strategy. For me, it's not an organisational strategy. It's not an organisational approach. You have to be able to make decisions yourselves and look through the lens, as I said, organisation and HR and the services that you provide. So starting point is most organisations would have their 2020 plans, their 3-year strategies, all that's in place. And elements, if not all of that, have been shelved or put on hold. And it's time now to decide what those plans are going to be, what ones are in your control, and what ones you need to start really re-engaging your staff back with. And acknowledging that there are unknowns, but there are unknowns when you develop your plans in the first place. And so it's not as if you've had all the information. You've just probably had more information in previous times. So the moving out of, you know, people put health and safety measures in place. They've looked at remote working, flexible working practices, facilitated different things around childcare, elderly parents. All that's happened, and that was absolutely the right thing to do. Arguably, you didn't have an option. There was very few other alternatives. People had to go about doing this. So now we're moving out of that into, well, what's happening now? And this is where some of the contributors today in remote working, health and well-being, are very valuable in terms of the considerations. That, you know, remote working absolutely has evolved at a quick pace. It's been fantastic. The question then is it something people are going to continue or not, or in what shape or form that is? But my view on that is that it should be done in a planned approach. And the opportunity now is to look at that and not default back to your old way of working, but equally not default into the emergency way of working that organisations have done. And that's just one example around HR that is very relevant, that we're having a lot of discussions with organisations on. So I know there's further discussion on that, but taking a planned approach to that, I think, is going to be important. And the same goes across any of your HR policies and practices. Ones that now, I suppose you look back and say they were probably ineffective previously, but because we've had to make those changes, they're a lot more effective, quicker, less people involved, and you're getting results and getting results quicker. The other element, again, I'd certainly feel on the planning process is going to be the health and well-being, because we know change can cause unrest, anxiety. Not everyone warms to change, particularly the pace of change at the moment. And we are moving into more uncertain times, in my view. And it's managing that and managing all the other things that are happening that can create that level of uncertainty and a new set of pressures. So how organizations can support your staff during, I suppose, future uncertain times. Don't wait for it to happen. Now's the time to take stock and look at these things. And I'm not looking for long lead-in periods in terms of making these decisions. We're saying, what now? We're coming into mid-year. We're nearly at coming into July for the final 6 months of the year. You know, we have 2 weeks left in June to make plans and move forward on certain things for the next 6 months, if not beyond, in the year.
2 minutes left.
Right, thanks. And there's some of the things we need to look at. So if I was to focus in on certain areas, I think employee engagement is a significant area. Communications, supporting managers in the new way of working, including performance management, probation reviews, all those particular areas are of significance in terms of supporting managers. If there's going to be changes in working practices, no matter what they are, remote working, sick leave, all of those sort of things, absolutely. You need now to take the time to make those changes. And they don't need to be permanent changes. You can put things in place to say for the next 6 months, this is what we're doing. I wouldn't be as concerned as you normally would be in precedent setting changes. So don't sleepwalk into the rest of 2020 and into 2021 in terms of your HR practices. Take the lead now in relation to all those particular areas. And I'll leave you one part, and it's, I suppose, Denise, you mentioned New Zealand already, and I was listening to radio yesterday, and New Zealand said they reported their first few cases of coronavirus in almost a month, unfortunately. But the Director General of the Health Department, I thought he summed it up very well, says, a new case is something we hoped we wouldn't get, but is also something we expected and have planned for. So take that approach on a HR perspective. Plan. There's going to be other things that happen that you can plan for. There's going to be funding challenges, fundraising challenges, you know, decisions, tough decisions that need to be made. But you can plan for elements of that. That better positions you to manage the unplanned elements. So thanks everyone, and I look forward to hopefully answering some of the questions later on.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present at this morning's webinar. I'm very excited at some of the information I've heard so far, and we're very much on the same page, I think, in terms of what my presentation is going to focus on. So I suppose following on from what Derek was saying about the importance of HR and decision making, what I'm hoping to do with this presentation is to give you some ideas around the information that's available to you, around some of the data that we have collected and that has been previously collected by Community Foundation and the Wheel, and Quality Matters myself, around conditions of employment and pay and benefits. Lauren is going to be managing my slides for me, so Lauren, if you wouldn't mind. First of all, the agenda, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to the National Pay and Benefits Survey that we conducted in 2019. I'm going to have a look at some of the current HR priorities and things that have happened as a result of the COVID crisis, and then looking ahead to potential future actions and priorities, taking as its basis some of the IBEC research in this area, which is freely available on the website. Looking at the original survey of pay and benefits, this 2019 is the most recent one. It's the fourth version, as Hazel referred to earlier. And there were 346 organisations that provided information. It is an incredibly useful benchmarking tool, and I would say to anybody who is considering getting involved in this to please do so. Even if you've only got one or two rates to contribute, it makes a huge difference in terms of understanding what's happening in the sector and what other organisations are doing. And I think, following on again from what Derek had said, as we move forward through this crisis, it's going to be really important for us to understand what is happening both in our own organisations and within the sector in general. So these type of reports are very useful in providing that insight and that focus. Lauren, if you could move on to the next one, please. So the overview of the report. Within the report, obviously, there's the profile of participating organisations. So we look at those 346 organisations. What are they? Who are they? Where are they based? What kind of work they do? We provide information on a broad range of rates of pay, everything from, you know, manual work, kitchen workers, cleaners, all the way up to CEO rates. So there's a huge amount of information in there on rates of pay, and it's broken down in a wide variety of ways. We have other pay information then, which is kind of how pay policy is formed, and some comparison information on pay with the private sector. And then the final section, section 4, is the conditions of employment and benefits. So I'm going to take you through some of the initial findings there. We cover everything, and Hazel mentioned a few of these in her presentation as well. So pension schemes, sick pay, overtime, paid leave, health insurance, educational assistance, training, maternity leave, paternity leave, bonus schemes, mileage allowances, on social premium, other benefits. I have N there at the very bottom, question marks, and that's just to state that not all 146 organisations provide any section. So there will be an N on each section that tells you how many organisations provided information, what exactly you're looking at in terms of representativeness within the data. So if we could move on, Lauren, to the next slide, please. In pension schemes, we're looking at just over half of the organisations had provided contributions to the pension schemes, and average contributions are provided where they were different for different levels. On overtime, very few organisations pay overtime. Where overtime is not paid, there was a time in lieu policy in place in 9 out of 10 of the organisations. Lauren, the next slide, please. Paid leave, an average of 23 days paid in organisations where employees all receive the same leave. Additional service leave, Christmas and Easter leave were also asked for. We asked for details of compassionate leave. I haven't gone into them here because they are broad and various, but they are within the report. 80% of organisations had a formal approach to sick leave, relatively rare to have a health insurance scheme, and educational assistance, huge amounts of support for educational assistance across the responses there. So 2/3 providing financial support and others providing time off. Maternity leave, 39% pay over and above the statutory entitlement when on maternity leave, 21% pay over and above the statutory entitlement for paternity leave. 80% of organisations offer flexible working arrangements, with part-time work the most common. However, 57% offered working at home 1 to 2 days, which I think, given the context we're all in now, I think that's an interesting finding on how things can change and can change relatively quickly. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. Bonuses, just fewer than 1 in 5. Around 1 in 5 had a subsidised canteen. Over 4 out of 5 provided free tea and coffee, and 64% of the respondents paid the civil service mileage rate in terms of mileage allowances. In terms of other benefits, around 1/3 provided a Christmas social event, and the average spend on training was 2.3% of payroll, with the median on 1%. So again, the median, there were some lower findings in there as well. And just over 1 in 5 measured the cost of benefits. Just to flag something, I suppose, in terms of the data that was collected in 2019, and it was published in November 2019. So that was very much the situation we were in then. Looking ahead at what has happened, I suppose, over the last little while, I have a couple of infographics here from the CSO. Almost half the population have had their employment impacted by COVID-19. 34% of organisations have started remote working from home. 23% have seen a change in their working hours, and 12% have increased their number of hours remote working. So there's a huge change in how things are done in terms of work, and that remote working has certainly been a feature that I think we've all experienced over the last few months. Lauren, if you could move to the next slide, please. Looking, the CSO have also produced a social impact of COVID-19, and that was produced in April. So again, you can see some worrying kind of trends in terms of what's been happening during this crisis. So alcohol consumption up, tobacco consumption up, frequency of exercise up for around 1/3 of people and down for around 1/3 of people. So some people reacting differently to that. 45% increase in junk food and sweets, 44% increased time spent watching TV, and 59% increased time spent on the internet. So again, as we're looking at these and looking at the possible impacts of particularly the crisis itself, and as we move out of that crisis, I suppose, over a quarter reporting feeling lonely, 12.2% rating overall life satisfaction as high. These compared with 44% in 2018. So again, there are some significant changes to how people are feeling throughout this crisis, as well as how workplaces have changed, and with that increased focus on flexible working and that increased ability for people to work at home. If we could move on to the next one, Lauren, please.
Geraldine, just 2 minutes left.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, Geraldine, technical difficulties,
Okay.
bear with me.
Okay, as I'm down to 2 minutes, I'm going to move very quickly through some of these slides here, but just to highlight and to call out some of the some of the actual impacts of COVID-19 and some of the things that we see have changed. So there are changes in employment. We can see that in terms of how people are employed and the measures of their employment. More flexible working, obviously, reductions in travel, events, face-to-face meeting, increased use of technology, difficulties around funding and pay, returning to work currently and implementing social distancing measures and making sure that people can safely return, dealing with performance management, dealing with motivation, and then dealing with well-being and mental health. So again, Lauren, if we could move on to the next one. So looking at this, IBEC, the next few slides are IBEC data, which, as I said, is freely available on the website. But do you expect any of the following long-term impacts of COVID-19 crisis in your organisation over the next 3 years? So we've got almost 3/4 of the organisations are saying greater use of remote working, greater use of flexible working, again in over 50%, 56% of organisations there, changed approach to work-life balance. I leave you to read through the rest of them on your own time, but there's quite a number of experiences there. And what is very clear in all of the data that we've collected is the amount of innovation that is going to be required in order to get us through the next phase of this. So looking ahead, people are seeing continuing more remote working, greater focus on mental health and well-being, introducing more and changed flexible working arrangements, more agile working. Interestingly, increased uptake on the cycle to work scheme as well in almost 1 in 5. So that's one that may be slightly unexpected, but may support the view of a healthier, maybe more engaged approach to workplace well-being. And my final slide then, Lauren, if you wouldn't mind. Sorry, the previous one on training. If we could look at leadership and people management, and this has been mentioned, the critical importance of that, along with well-being, coaching and mentoring. Throughout all of this, I think one of the key focuses has got to be on HR departments making the correct decisions and making evidence-based decisions both within their own workplaces and what is happening in the sector. So again, just to say to people to keep a weather eye out on what's happening in terms of data that's being collected. There are loads of people operating in this space and collecting data, and it is being made widely available. So definitely, if you do have a chance to keep an eye on that, and we'll probably go through this in a little bit more detail in the question session. But for now, what I'd like to do is hand over to Peter Mcbride to continue on with his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Geraldine. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate the opportunity to join you all this morning. As my bio says, I'm currently the Cohen Director, the Director of the Cohen Centre for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, which is based in the States. So I am working from home here in Ireland in a job that is thousands of miles away. I've had the privilege in the past of being on the board of the Wheel, and so I'd just like to take this opportunity to commend staff in pulling this together, getting such an excellent group of speakers and covering such an important topic. The direct relevance to me goes back to an early part of my career about 20 years ago, where I joined a large mental health charity in the north of Ireland. And my role in joining that charity was to set up a workplace mental health capacity within it. At the time we called it Care Call, and at the time it was really innovative. At the time it was there were fairly few other organizations doing this, but it entered into this world of employee assistance programs. And the vehicle that it entered in around that time was the sort of health and safety model for well-being, which is effectively a deficit model. It is that, work can be very bad for your health, work can be very bad for your mental health. Therefore, employers need to risk assess, they need to put measures in place to avoid the workplace being a damaging place for you. And for the first many years of Care Call's existence, when I was involved with it, we were involved in very much a health and safety model of using language around stress and helping people relieve stress or manage stress. Latterly, that has flipped, and that brings us right into the present day, where the current crisis, I think, elaborates this even more. So the flip was a change away from that sort of deficit model to thinking about well-being in a positive way. In other words, what do employers need to do to support, enhance, promote the psychological well-being of their staff, not just prevent their staff from becoming unwell? So the preventing staff becoming unwell in a way was taken as a given. The health and safety model was taken as a given, as with most things. And the emphasis changed on to looking at how employers take responsibility or contribute to promoting the resilience of their staff, the psychological resilience of their staff, and how to promote the well-being of their staff. And the context of this was very much around staff retention and around performance. In an increasingly competitive environment, what could employers do to hold on to their staff, attract the very best staff that were out there, the very best people for jobs, and how could they maintain high levels of performance? Now, the reason I give that as a kind of context to what I want to say to you is that I think those issues in the light of COVID are more important than they have ever been. I think that it's not unreasonable to say that the COVID crisis has become a global existential crisis. There is not a single country in the world that I know of that is not dealing with it. It is a topic of conversation that crosses across all boundaries of religion and geographic boundaries as well. And so in the sense that it is a universal issue, a global issue, and in the sense that for most of us work is the largest part of our lives, then it is obviously and clearly going to have a huge impact on our working lives. But I would argue it is, speaking in terms psychologically and speaking about it in terms of the psychological impact of it, I think it's really important to start this by talking about the existential impact of this. There are going to be people in our workplaces who have died as a consequence of COVID. There are going to be people in our workplaces who have had close family members die as a consequence of COVID. And there are going to be people who, as a consequence of COVID, have had friends or other people that they know killed by this. And so the first thing I suppose I want to say is that within the workplace, our understanding of mortality, how bereavement affects individuals, and how particularly with the particular challenges around this crisis, the processes of grieving have been affected. It's really important to understand that and to understand how that will affect people, because I would predict for many years before I became involved in the work I was describing, I worked in a bereavement charity, and complex deaths cause complex grief reactions. So one of the legacies of COVID as we go over the coming months and years are going to be complex grief reactions that will find themselves being worked out in the workplace where we start to see it. There's also the impact of long-term illness. There's always while there are percentage-wise relatively few people who catch COVID will die of it, many people will have long-lasting health problems associated with it. And therefore it's important to understand that legacy issue and the tail of this. And the last bit of this first part, I suppose, is also that in the sense that this is an existential crisis, that this is a threat to our lives, it's a threat to our well-being, there is trauma associated with that. We hear it manifest, we hear it talked about in terms of anxiety, people feel anxious. So there's trauma associated with a threat to our salaries, there's a trauma associated with losing friends, there's trauma associated with worrying about our own health, there's trauma associated with going out our front doors and not knowing if today's the day that we're going to get infected. So I think it's important to understand how trauma affects individuals. We tend to withdraw. And one of the negative consequences of working from home, for example, is that it exacerbates that sense of that withdrawal from the rest of life, exacerbates that anxiety that people will feel about the need to hunker down and protect themselves. And it means that people, out of necessity, withdraw from the personal relationships that are the ones that are most likely to support them when they need it. So in this weird new world of COVID, our friends, the people who we are closest to, are also the most dangerous sources of infection. And so we go from hugging and kissing and wanting to be intimate with and close to the people that we care about and love, to having to maintain our distance, having to see them as a threat or ourselves as a threat to them. And that has an effect on personal relationships. It has an effect on our sense of our own well-being. It will have a longer-term effect on our ability to form those relationships and feel secure and deal with our anxiety and use the support of our friends and family. There is also an indirect impact. mental health problems, there's clear evidence that there is an increase in mental health problems. People are experiencing more mental illness. And I would argue that part of it is that the normal coping strategies that we have been compromised. You know, if my coping strategy was to go out, have a chat with my friends, go for a walk, go and do some exercise, just get my head showered, to use that expression, up until recently, those options weren't around for me. And so the things that I would normally have done, or maybe if I'd thrown myself into my work or just got involved in something with other people to take my mind off things. With the increasing isolation, that has not been possible. And so in the workplace, we are going to see the outworking of that in terms of increased levels of mental illness, people struggling and being challenged around how they keep themselves well and what strategies they use to deal with isolation. I mean,
2 minutes, Peter.
Thank you. We've all become much more familiar with Zoom and with this kind of technology, and that creates a form of intimacy. But we all know, and it's obvious to say, it's not the same. And so we need to think about how we deal with the legacy of this and how that manifests itself in the workplace. And that brings me finally then to the specifics around this, around the workplace. Clearly, many of us will find ourselves working at home. The other important thing to say is that this has not been a universal experience. It's not been the same for everybody. For some people, it has meant sitting at home doing very little, actually, for the last 2 or 3 months and just keeping themselves isolated. For others, it's meant them taking risks, being on the front line, taking risks with their own life and well-being, and also taking risks to ensure the survival of their organizations. So as we deal with this new world where people are that one step removed from their work, not just physically, but also psychologically, this has threatened people. And for many people, they will be considering their future. They'll be considering what life is all about anyway. You know, what role do I want work to play in a world where I felt so deeply threatened? So in that environment, there's a real importance of reaching out to staff. How do we provide a sense of connection for people when we can't have physical connection? And the responsibility for that lies on employers to be much more proactive in their engagement with their staff, to think about what supervision, management of workload, appraisal looks like, to do the majority of it online, and to show what I describe often as compassionate leadership. Compassionate leadership is leadership that is based on an understanding of the frailty of the human condition and the need to support one another, to care for one another. In this scary, frightening world where viruses kill people, we need to look after one another. And employers that really care for their staff, not just put in place programs, but actually show care and compassion in the way they allow for the challenges people face, give flexibility, to do it in a way that is genuinely compassionate, is, in my view, going to be one of the significant keys to this. So the danger with this is we put a load of mechanisms in. My challenge to us is there has to be the right sentiment behind it. Compassionate leadership is what is required now, and when you experience compassionate leadership as an employee, it's something that you recognize very, very clearly. Thank you very much. It's now my pleasure to hand over to Tracy Keogh, who's going to be the last speaker.
Okay, hello. Thank you very much, and thank you for that, Peter. Probably apt that we come in on remote working directly after that one. So my name is Tracy, and I'm co-founder of an organisation called Grow Remote. We are a social enterprise on a mission to enable us to work, live and participate locally. We do that by making remote work both visible and accessible. Important to note, just starting off here, I'm just going to check the time, that what we've been doing to date has not been work from home or remote working, it is crisis management. Even the remote working world, the experts in this space have found the last couple of months now difficult. So just to set expectations there, it's not remote working as we would understand it at all. So in terms of where we sit, we focus on salaried roles that just simply do not have to be performed in one specific location. So they can be performed from a co-working space, the office if you want, and also work from home. So whichever suits you. In terms of trends, just yesterday Slack announced that they're going fully remote. Twitter have announced it, Barclays Bank have announced it. A lot of companies are enabling choice So it's not exactly that you all have to work from the few square meters in your bedroom or whatever, but you will have a choice in terms of where you work. For us, it's really important because it allows people to stay local. It's important for a range of reasons. If you could hear the stories that we hear in terms of people whose parents have, severe illness, who need to be working at home, single parents, there's a whole range of reasons why people can't go into one location to work, and so this is very exciting for us. So just to bring you through maybe in terms of the transitions as well that are happening, but just before that, there are 317 jobs currently available in Glenamaddy. I can't help but get through this while I have all of you on the call. 317 jobs, and the reason that we don't know about them is because we still search by location. And we search on traditional jobs boards like jobs.ie. So there you can see, like, it's even populating stuff in Castlebar, which, but if you search on Remote Circle, which is a board created by a couple in rural Scotland, you'll see all the jobs that could be there. And Grow Remote has a board, remotejobsireland.com as well, and it's free for everybody. But obviously just to get employment locally. And so these companies are already employing all over Ireland, and there's a range of reasons for that. But if you want to kind of get through for your own business, there's a website called Global Workplace Analytics, and any stat that you see around remote work, although they won't be credited, that's where it's come from. And on Global Workplace Analytics /ROI, you'll be able to calculate out your return on investment for your particular company around how they can help you. But fundamentally, like, it helps the environment, it helps our work-life balance, and it can, particularly now as we move into cost reduction environment, please do remove your buildings before your people, and we can reduce obviously real estate costs that way. So fundamentally, remote is a lever that you can pull to achieve any strategic goal, whether it be you want more engaged workforce, you want to access more talent, you want to retain them, or you want to reduce your costs. But to enable that, we need three things to work in tandem. We need your policy, your technology, and your culture. And when all those three are in place, we are absolutely flying it and into the nirvana space of remote working. So just to let you know what other kind of large companies are doing, and small companies in terms of understanding what the future might look like. I guess the first is obviously surveying their staff and covering off everything. So whether that be the equipment, the challenges, and a post-COVID way of working. So again, not so that people aren't confused about working from home and remote working, because they're different things. Working from home is one part of remote working, but they're not exactly the same. And then any remote specific supports that a company needs to put in. We've got a template for that survey on our website, obviously free. So out of the survey then, you might find a bunch of things, and you're probably going to need to do a couple of different things. We won't say recreate the physical environment, because that's not really what you're doing here, but just to help you maybe work the analogy, the building, you're going to need a digital workspace for a digital workforce. So something like Teams or Slack. The larger you are, you might go into Teams, smaller Slack. That's what we're seeing. Then meeting rooms, Zoom, Skype, or there's another thing called Whereby. That's a really good video conferencing tool. And then the desk. So is there a home office stipend? Is there a co-working space stipend? Co-working spaces are about €200 per month, and they're often run by community groups in towns. They're really important for revitalizing our main streets, and they bring everybody together. And as I said, they're usually probably social enterprises or CLGs. And then the canteen. So essentially everything in the remote world has to be a little bit more deliberate and intentional. So how are you recreating those synergy? I can't think of the word now, but you know what I mean, those interactions that just happen. There's an organization called Circle CI, who one of their rules is no hallway conversations. That's not that if you pass your colleague on a hallway you can't speak to them, but you think about kind of incorporating your remote colleagues in that, so that stuff that happens in the office isn't just curtailed in the office. Glowfox are a hybrid organization, and just to give you an example of what they use a thing called Notion for the brain of the organization, Zoom and Slack, kind of video and digital workspace, and then collaboration is Miro, Loom, and Google Docs. Finn has a talk on our YouTube space around hybrid working and the tools that they use, and they use a tool called Lattice for performance management, although it does cost $3,000 straight out of the gate, so it depends how much money you have if you're like, oh, it's not a lot. So when you've surveyed, you'll kind of understand your end state, and the end state is generally 1/3 back to the office, don't want to talk about remote, 1/3 some days in, some days out, which isn't powerful enough for our communities because you still probably have to live in a city or wherever, but 1/3 fully remote. And then you're into hybrid. A hybrid is a lot more complicated than just in office or just remote. So the thing that kind of unlocks that or cracks that is implementing a remote first culture. To implement a remote first culture is basically when you think about, I was just thinking about a situation there where I'll use a basic one actually. So there's a meeting and 8 people are in the office and there's 2 people out. The 2 people out of the office could get dialed in on a BT conference line or on one big screen in Skype. That is not equal access to people, context, information, and therefore opportunity. So in a remote first culture, you all log in on your own tile, on your own kind of Zoom account, whether you're in the office or not. And that gives equal access, and that kind of levels out the playing field, and everybody's operating on that same kind of piece. And it also kind of allows then for, it will impact on the promotional opportunities for everybody. And again, key decisions are discussed online. Essentially, the center of power is no longer in an office. And if you're hybrid, you have to work really hard to work around that, because it's the people's natural inclination to work with people they see every day as well. So after you have surveyed, you understand your end state, you kind of have all that kind of set up. You need to build in some supports. So remote itself is a skill that is layered on top of any remote role. And if you look at the skills, Workplaceless, who are an organisation who have the only certification in remote work, have a competency model going across digital proficiency, performing and managing culture and growth. That's available for free online. And together with IDA and Solace and Leash and Off ETB, we've got a free course in managing remote teams. But added on to that into your supports might be other things. So I think core competencies, people need to be trained up, but then you will need to address well-being. So if you speak to Shopify staff, and Shopify have employed over 400 people, all working from home or co-working space in Ireland, at least one in every county in Ireland, they will tell you that they have never felt more connected with their colleagues than in any other company that they've worked in, because Shopify are deliberately remote and they have thought this through. And that's the difference. So you might be disconnected in a company that does it accidentally, or where I think in Ireland we're used to people getting one-off deals to go back down the country, and they feel disconnected because they are. But in deliberately remote companies, that would not be the case, and it could indeed be the opposite. So first of all, is social scene. Are you working to run any initiatives?
2 minutes, Tracy.
Perfect, thank you, Denise. Running any initiatives for that. And Scraping Hub, who are Ireland's largest homegrown remote company, would say that they're better from the ground up. So empowering people to run their own social initiatives. I know HubSpot, who are hybrid remote, will send you out a beer and whatever else to your house, and they'll have a party together. Connection. So are you facilitating connection amongst the team members, as well as from the team members into the group, into the organization? I didn't know how to phrase this, but what some companies do is when everybody logs on in the morning, there is a mood heads up. I'm not feeling good, or they do it with a GIF, or they do it with an app or whatever. But it allows you to see, actually, I'm probably not going to go and ask Denise for that today because she's just not feeling the best. And that's stuff that you would see in the office, but you don't see in remote. So again, you make a special call out for it. And it's even better because it's more overt, and you can see, on day-to-day basis, where you wouldn't think about saying it in the office. It becomes more an open part of your culture. And so look, in remote team building, everything needs to be culture, everything needs to be a lot more deliberate and thought through. The glue needs to be there. There are lots of different ways for scaling it across your organization, depending on what size you are, but central communications and team charter distributions are 2 core ways. And then there's a roadmap. Start off with your learning toolkit and the L&D, put the basics in place and track them as they move over to thriving remotely, where loneliness is not a thing. And indeed, they're saying what Shopify staff are saying, we feel even more connected than ever before. Cost reduction, because we know we're in that environment. We used to talk about staff retention, but that's not where we are anymore, right? So it can help you with cost reduction. And generally, it can just fall out, because I know like a lot of the groups here, there are hundreds of jobs available in any of our communities right here today. And if we can get that job into our local community, and we can get the income staying there and the people staying there, we can get our main streets back. We'll be just flying it, our GA18s back, our farmers markets back, and we will be, yes, we'll be flying it. So that is all of what I have to say. And Denise, I'll pass it back to you. Are you there?
Great. Thanks, Tracy, and thanks to all our panelists for those fantastic inputs. We're going to have time now to unpack those a little bit more, and then we'll have time around questions and answers. Just to remind people to put any questions or comments in, johnny@wheel.ie, and we look forward to having a discussion around them. So we're going to go into the breakout rooms now. I'm just going to outline the 2 questions. Sinead has put people in the different groups, and she's going to explain how that will work. But the 2 questions for discussion: staff well-being, how to ensure that this is recognised and supported as being crucial to an organisation's success. That's one of the discussions. And the other discussion then is the advantages and challenges of remote working for staff, and what is the future of remote working. And obviously we've had some great input and considerations as catalysts for both of those discussions. So I'll hand over to Sinead, and she's going to run us through the next stage.
Super, thank you so much, Denise, and everyone. It's been great listening so far. So yes, I'm going to pop you all into breakout groups now. So if this is your first experience of a Zoom breakout group, not to worry. Basically, I'm going to open up the rooms shortly, and you will all receive a little window will pop up on your device there inviting you to join now or later. So I'll ask you to click now when you see that notification. Just before you head in, I have popped a link into the chat box there if you want to open it just now before you go into the breakout group, because once you go there, you won't be able to see that chat box anymore. That just contains those questions that Denise had just outlined, just in case once you magic your way into the breakout group, your mind goes blank. I know that happens to me sometimes. So the questions are there in that link in the chat box there. So I'm just going to make sure you're going in for 25 minutes. I'm going to open up these rooms now, and you can all start to join. If anyone has any problems, please speak up or pop it into the chat box here if you can't access those breakout groups. Reminder to most certainly mute yourselves and turn off your videos if you don't mind, please. And we just have another minute or so as people trickle back in, but then the rooms will be closed automatically and everyone will be zoomed back here into the main Zoom room.
Denise?
Yeah?
If by any chance...
Great, thanks Sinead. Welcome back everybody. I hope you had some good discussions. So we're going to have now till about 12:05 just an opportunity to answer some of the questions that you've posed from our panelists. Derek, I'm going to go to you first, and just interest in when you were talking about the necessity for decisiveness and to plan ahead for 6 months and not to be too worried about precedent. Mm-hmm. And I suppose those of us that have been thinking about HR for many years, precedent has always been central to any consideration. So I wonder, would you just unpack that a little more for us?
Yeah, absolutely, Denise. I think, look, absolutely, it's not that we can't be aware of it, and I think that the more recent months has shown that's been parked by unions and employers and employees alike. So from that perspective, I think what you're looking to do is identify what is the most appropriate next set of decisions and or policy changes. And if it is that for the next 6 months or 12 months that you are putting in an arrangement, it's like doing a pilot at times. You're specifying up front that this is something we're doing because of the circumstances we find ourselves in, and we don't know the lie of the land in 6 or 12 months' time. So I'd be caveating it up front with employees, unions, whoever else alike, to say, you know, we feel this is the best way forward for everyone in agreement, and that we're doing it in good faith, that we don't, you know, if it doesn't work out or the landscape changes around us and we have to revert back to our previous way of working in terms of flexibility, various different things, that you just don't want to quote it back to you, to say, well, now that you've done it, you must stick to it. So I do think has been a lot of goodwill out there in relation to where we are at now, and so it's not to lose that goodwill, but equally that goodwill is diminishing because people want to know a bit more about what way we're going to be working in the future.
And just a follow-up question, people have asked about the transitioning, you know, when you're deciding who comes back, who doesn't, and there was mention of a survey, of a staff survey. Would you have a template for that, or would anybody, is there just any recommendations around that?
Yeah, there's certain headings that we would look for organisations to cover. So obviously the return to work protocols are out there in terms of requirements from an organisational perspective around health and safety. But that's just one set of considerations. There's many more considerations from an employee perspective, and I know Tracy's touched upon a few in terms of kind of the whole area of remote working. So absolutely, it's the time to ask staff those questions. But I would use the language about organisational requirements and employee preferences. And the two don't always meet, and they're not always going to be meet right in the middle. And employees need to understand that, and organisations, and it's to try and find common ground. But where there isn't common ground, then look, organisations have to meet funders' requirements, service requirements, SLAs, and those, I suppose, will still need to happen at the end of the day. So don't be afraid to ask the questions of staff, I would say, but equally, you have to manage expectations as to what may or may not be possible in the medium or long term.
Okay, thanks, Derek. Georging, over to you. You gave us such rich data, and Hazel, in her introduction, I suppose, made the point that it's so important for us to understand what's going on, you know, to understand the sector, to understand the changing and emerging needs so that we can respond as a sector and as organisations. There was a couple of slides on COVID and the implications of that for employers. Would you just remind us of some of those key points?
Sure. Thank you, Denise. Yeah, there's a lot of data, and we went through it very quickly. So just to remind people that the presentations will be available to them afterwards. And plus, I will also make sure that Lauren and Sinead have links to the IBEC page where all our data is freely available.
Great.
I think what we've seen throughout this crisis, and certainly from a data point of view, I personally have processed over 2,000 questionnaires since the end of March in terms of talking to HR directors and CEOs about what's happening. And what I can say with absolute certainty is that that has changed every single time I've looked at it over that period of time. There have been, you know, in the throes of COVID, it is very much an emerging situation. It was very much a reaction. It was very much a case of managing your way through a crisis and making sure that, you know, as many people as possible were able to have the flexibility to work at home if possible, had supports in terms of well-being, that the communications were in place to support all that, and that people were coping with it and with managing it. I think what's becoming clear to us in the most recent research is that while some of those things will drop off as we move through this crisis and as we start bringing people back to work in a more coherent way, I think what's going to happen is some of those things that were a priority over the duration of the crisis will no longer be important or be done at all. And what we need to kind of start focusing on now, and I think this kind of builds a little bit on what Derek was saying, is that we need to manage our way out of this and kind of understand what are we going to hold on to and what are key behaviours and things that we want to implement, building on that synergy between the organisational requirements and the employees' preferences. So understanding what people need, understanding what the organisational requirements are, understanding what those work plans that we've all had to adjust and change, what they're going to look like into the future, and trying to make sure that all those pieces that support all of those are in place. What I would say to people around data as well is there are an awful lot of people operating in this space. There's a lot of data being collected. It is mostly widely available and open to people to have a look at what's happening in other organisations. And I think as people move through this and kind of understanding where we're going to be in the next 3 to 6 months, where we're going to be in 2 to 3 years' time, people are going to start looking at that in a little bit more detail now. And I know certainly IBEC would be one of those people that do that. And I think what we're going to see is certainly remote working seems to be one of the big pieces that's coming through. And I know Tracy's probably going to define remote and home working a little bit more, just in terms of the differences between the two. But potentially, you know, as people said, we have been working from home in a crisis up to now. What does that look like for the organisation as we move forward? Do they want people to continue to work from home full time? Do they want people to be back in the office full time? Do they want some kind of hybrid version of both? And in terms of understanding how work plans, how various elements have to change to facilitate that, I think that's going to be a key consideration for HR departments. Just 2 other quick things I'd like to say in terms of the data, and that's around the importance of leadership. I think that cannot be underestimated here. I think, everything stems from that in terms of, making sure that communications are adequate, making sure that everybody's viewpoints are taken into account, that everybody knows what's happening, and that preferences are, that there is a method or a channel for which, through which employees can put their preferences through to leadership, and just make sure that those things are being covered off. And the other one is the key role of HR here. And I think this has been evident throughout the crisis. I think HR, certainly in our own experience and from dealing with HR professionals across the private sector in general, the absolute innovation that we have seen from HR departments in the last while has been incredible. The amount of information that people have had to process, the amount of processes that have had to be put in place, the amount of things that have had to be done, absolutely incredible. And I think what we're going to see over the next little while, that the importance of that engagement with HR is going to continue. The importance of HR in driving this, in making sure that the importance of this remains at leadership level, is going to be really, really important. And I also think, just building on that as well, that Peter's comment about compassionate leadership is really important here. I think understanding that we have to move through this in a compassionate way. It's change, and all change is difficult. And whether it's change you want or a change you don't want, it's still going to be something that we need to manage, and that HR professionals in particular need to be cognizant of and in a position to manage. So what I would just finalize by saying, yes, there's a lot of data, and that is more to kind of let people know you're not on your own, or to get ideas for what other people are doing. But don't be led by that. I think organizations are going to manage this individually, and there's going to be a huge amount of innovation required on the part of everybody involved.
Great, thanks, Geraldine. Yeah, a lot in that. Thank you very much. Tracy, I'm going to go to you. So first of all, I was going to ask you just the different definition between working from home and working remotely, and then just to comment a little bit more about the difference between crisis management and then moving into a proactive look at both of those.
Yeah, so on the first, I guess, language is a huge barrier to our communities in terms of accessing employment. And so we've toyed around with lots of different words, and our most recent term is locationless employment. So work wherever you want, work from home if that's suitable, work from a co-working space if that's suitable, and work from the office. You will find companies like eBay who only allow you to work from home because that's what they're most comfortable with. Whereas there is a company called Doist who will pay your co-working fee or pay your home office setup. So there are different companies, but fundamentally, that is locationless. And I've forgotten your second part of the question already.
Just as we move from crisis management and into a more proactive look at the future of work.
In a remote team, you would be onboarded remotely. So if you look at, say, I can take Shopify because they're the most, I guess, mainstream one in Ireland. You'd be onboarded remotely. On your first day, you would get a kit delivered to your house. You would have a buddy system worked in. So you'd have a buddy within the organization who could help you navigate it. You would have all of those things from the get-go, and your performance management, everything around you will be set up for remote first or fully remote organization, and that just isn't the case now. Equally, you can't go down to your local co-working space, and there are 300 in Ireland, and go meet your friends. So all of that is just compounding where you are just stuck inside your house. And even for me, I'm dying to get back to the office post-COVID. So I think everybody is, and I think it's a completely different thing. And I think that employers on the whole, I think, have been quite empathetic. They've understood that people have obligations at home and had to make allowances. But all of that would not be the case in a normal remote environment. And so there's a lot of going back to the office now, return to work. I'd question why. Why are you going back? Have you, as much as you say, why would you go remote? Could you apply the same question to why are we going back to the office? And if you get really good answers to that, then super. But if there are answers like we won't feel as connected, we won't this, that, they're assumptions, I would say. And I would say to take a look at the hybrid companies like HubSpot. Megan Williams is the first diversity and inclusion person purely for remote work in HubSpot. GitLab, Shopify, all these companies. And just double check those assumptions to see if they are the case, because the upside of remote work is so transformative for individuals, for companies, and for communities that we can't let a couple of assumptions get in our way. So
brilliant, thanks Tracy. And just again to say to people, to reiterate that Some of the resources that were highlighted in the presentations will be available from the wheel. Peter, over to you. I think your comments had resonance for lots of people out there. And you talked a lot about the impact, I suppose, of what we're trying to do with at the moment, and a response to that being compassionate leadership. Can you talk to me a little bit more about that and maybe give some examples? Would you make that visible for people, what that looks like?
Sure. So I'll tell you a wee bit about how my thinking has developed on it. I've done a lot of training for the health service here in the north, and in the NHS in the UK, one of their core values is compassion. So it's named there because they're a caring organisation. And the challenge they faced was how, if that's a core value, it's kind of obvious how the expectations of that in terms of how they treat people who use their services. But my challenge to them was how do you manifest that in terms of management of staff, and how staff experience both in terms of both management and leadership, compassionate management, compassionate leadership. So the challenging bit about this, and this may sound really obvious, but I think it is by far the most challenging component of it, is that well-being, staff well-being, is a matrix through which almost universally all decisions get considered. So in terms of management and leadership, it is the well-being of staff that becomes the sort of primary lens through which appraisals take place, through which the management of workloads take place, through which performance management takes place. This links in with a lot of empirical research around performance and around what creates great performance in the workplace. And it is that people feel themselves. There's all that sort of technical stuff around clarity of role and being clear about what is expected of them, being supported to do that. And I'm kind of taking that as a given. I'm not minimizing it. It's really important. But to get to the next level, the bit above that is where people feel themselves, not just know it intellectually, but feel themselves to be genuinely cared for and supported. Cared for being important. I think this is particularly important post-COVID, where people are so vulnerable, where there has been such pain, where there is such a sense of anxiety around. And I think that one of the challenges we face is that there are lots and lots of technical challenges we've been talking about them today, changes in working patterns. There's a lot of mechanical things that are going to need to happen around changes to the workplace. I suppose what I'm suggesting is layered in on top of that, if staff experience that through the framework of genuine care and concern for their well-being, their ability to accept it, their willingness to engage with it, their creativity about adapting it to make sure their performance remains good, is all going to be enhanced. And I think, so on the one hand, it's quite a nebulous concept of simply caring, but I don't think that's nebulous at all. It brings in this issue about intent. As a manager, as a leader, do you really care about your staff? Because if you don't, they're going to know about it. If all you care about is the bottom line, your staff are going to know about that. So if you really care about your staff's well-being, then that will start to manifest itself in the way that they are treated and in the kind of decision-making processes. It doesn't mean tough decisions aren't made, but it means that they're made in a different sort of way. And offline, you asked me to think of an example of a person, and it's dead easy. She was mentioned earlier on, Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand. There has not been a single time that I've seen her on TV where two things haven't happened. One, she has been talking about really difficult things, shootings, people dying, really difficult things. And secondly, she has done it with love and compassion, and where you can see that as a person, she has allowed herself, she's had the courage to allow herself to be emotionally affected by it and to respond to that. So this is a mixture of, emotional intelligence and courage to be human and to understand that our staff are human as well, and that well-being and their well-being is an intrinsic part of the success of our organizations, of our businesses. So I started this thinking about this in a very specifically care setting. What has been really clear to me is that this is not just applicable in a setting of care, it's applicable in tough business as well. Because it affects performance, it affects bottom line, it affects how people engage with their employment, it affects retention, it affects all those good things. You can't fake it. It has to be real. But when it is real, I think it is one of the most powerful characteristics of an organization if staff are able to say, my managers and my bosses, they really, really care. They care about me. They care about my well-being. It makes a huge and transformative difference.
Thanks, Peter. Tracy, I'm going to go to you. There was a lot of questions about performance, and Peter has put a really good lens to that in terms of a way of ensuring and engaging performance. Some anxieties around when you go to remotely. How do you keep that motivation high? How do you manage and monitor performance is one of the questions.
So I think remote working might accentuate any problems you already have. If you're monitoring performance based on who's coming into the office, and then you probably have a problem with performance anyway. And being remote is only going to accentuate that. So Peter mentioned around, taking it as a given, and remote working will be very much output based. So we were on our breakout call talking about some companies may be turning to having Zoom on all the time so they can watch you. Which wouldn't be a way maybe to go about things. Or even worse, you were saying some companies are saying, oh, for your sick days you can work from home, which is even worse, to take your sick days. But so it's output based. And so Scraping Hub, again, actually their CEO Shane Evans speaks a lot about this and about the trust needed and the autonomy needed in remote teams. But trust is not blind faith. Trust is setting up the processes so that people have the boundaries and the frameworks to work within. And then there are tools then on top of that, on top of your culture, that you can use to track performance, and you can use to track culture. So to give you for instance, Lattice is probably the most popular one. But even within our Slack group in Grow Remote, we have an add-on called Elin, and that tracks the culture within the Slack group. So it tracks the language used, how people are speaking to one another, all of that, and gives us insights around that. So on performance management, it needs to be output based, but it's not blind faith. It's processes for trust, and you need to put in the tools to back it up. But if you look into the training for managers and leaders, there's a lot to do with teaching them how to trust, teaching them how to empower other people, and showing them as well examples of remote done well, where people are performing. If you look at the Glassdoor ratings of remote companies, they're generally pretty high. And it's because all the things that you would expect in an office environment need to happen in a remote environment. So
Great.
A roundabout answer there.
No, really good. Thanks, Lillian. Really, really clear. So we're actually coming to the end of the discussion now. So thanks to everybody for their questions, and thanks to the panelists for answering them. I'm going to go back to the panelists for, I suppose, a final observation. We've had a really rich discussion here this morning. We've had the benefit of listening to all of you with your different perspectives and lenses. So I'm going to ask each one just to make a comment, an observation, a final contribution. Derek, I'm going to start with you.
Thanks, Denise. To sum up, I would say that for me, I view change as an opportunity to make changes. So to control the ones that you can control and impact positively. So don't look at change as losing something. I would say change is something that you're able to positively influence. HR have a huge role to lead out in that, and by doing it with the staff, really does lend for future success. And lead-in times need to shorten in terms of decision making, and I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Denise.
Great, thanks a million. Geraldine, over to you.
Thank you. Yep. I think just second what Derek has just said, and also sort of add to it in terms of what we're seeing now and what we're expecting to see in the next while. I think over the period of the initial crisis, we have seen that several things that were possibly changes that were down the line for us in terms of remote working or working at home have been implemented very, very quickly. And I think in terms of some of the proof points that people might have been waiting for, I think some of that may have happened during COVID-19. So I think probably what we need to kind of focus on is what we think are going to be the longer term impacts of that for the organization. We need to embrace the innovation and change that's going to come with this. And I think we need to take the opportunity, because this is an opportunity insofar as it's been a difficult one. It is a massive opportunity for organizations and for individuals to make changes that we may have all secretly been hoping for, and now we're in a position to actually implement. So I think a certain amount of encouragement from me to say to people, embrace the change. I think it would be very helpful for organisations and for individuals, and understand which bits of it are likely to stick long term and which bits of it were purely crisis related and can be removed once this is over. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Geraldine. Tracy, final, I suppose, comments or observations, pieces of advice?
I suppose for us, it's just the opportunity, right? So employment is a fundamental driver of our communities. Remote work can help so many different things, from the SDGs to climate change, whatever else you're working on. If you want to kind of fundamentally drive any of those pieces, remote working can do that. The conversations that we're having are with big organizations, with small organizations. For sure there are challenges, but they're all so easy to be overcome. And making employment accessible to everybody is, I suppose, a brilliant thing to be able to do, both for your own talent acquisition, retention and cost reduction, but also just for general population. So really it's consider it well, and if you do during the course of a conversation come up with any biases or assumptions that you have around remote work, share them publicly, share them with us, share them, and maybe it might not be suitable for you, but maybe it will, and if it is, it will be transformative for everybody. So that's really, the last piece is, if you do have remote work, make it visible. So when advertising jobs, advertising them without a location within the Republic of Ireland, that is a very important thing to do. Anyway, thank you, that is it.
Well, that's great. Thanks, Tracy. Peter?
Yeah, I agree with what everybody has said so far. I think there's the opportunity for learning in this. I suppose I would say that there is, because of the scale of this existential crisis, there's the opportunity for some very personal learning. For some people, this will be an opportunity to reevaluate their lives and their work lives, what they want to do with work. If my challenge can be taken around compassionate leadership and compassionate management, then there's a third spoke on that, which is about compassionate self-care. That if we're going to be compassionate leaders or compassionate managers, we need to be able to show compassion to ourselves. And if anything, this global crisis has shown us just how fragile life is and how important it is to take care of ourselves and take care of the people that we love. And that's what I would like people to take away, how important it is to take care of ourselves and the people we love.
Thanks, Peter. So my last task then is to really thank all the panelists for their expertise and their contributions today. It was just such a rich discussion, and I know everybody will have benefit from it. I suppose a few final closing observations from me. I'm very struck with Hazel introducing the data and the information provision contribution, just the importance of us knowing what's going on in the sector, and then the rich information that Geraldine provided for us, but with I suppose the proviso that it's changing all the time, that there's lots out there, but there's lots changing, and it does highlight a lot of the opportunity, I suppose, that we've been talking about today. Really struck, Derek, by just the practical information that you had for us, and again, that not being too worried about precedent, making the plan, possibility for pilots, really taking cognizance of what's happened, what's effective, what's not effective, and an opportunity really to have a rehaul and a review, and really thanks for those insights. And again, Tracy, lots of really practical information, examples where we can look to, huge challenges to us. Again, I was really struck by, the future of work and how we're moving, and that question, why not remote, or switching that around, but also the impact on the wider communities. So not just the individual, the organisation, but the positive impact for both of those and the wider community. So thanks for all the richness of that. And Peter, I think for everybody, the resonance around compassionate leadership, really what it looks like, the advantages of it, and that final message that you've left us with, that it's not just about compassionate leadership, but it's about self-care, that this is huge, the context that we're working in. I'm going to go back to Derek's comment to finish, is when you pointed to New Zealand and said they hoped they wouldn't have a case, but they expected it and they planned for it. And I think that's really what I'd like to leave us with. I'm handing now back to Elizabeth, I think. Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Thanks a million. It was fantastic.
Lovely. Thank you, Denise. I think everybody can hear me. Yeah, I just couldn't actually see myself. So thank you very much, Denise. And I suppose, just reiterating everything Denise has said, I think that has been some excellent learning. I think just even taking my own personal, I think it has actually opened my mind in terms of, for us as an organization and for me as an individual. And it is about that. We have for so long, and again, it's like Derek and the precedents, but we end up being very, just possibly tunnel visioned. And really this entire crisis, there is so much opportunity. In every challenge, there is an opportunity, and now more than ever. So this has really, I think, helped. And if I feel that, I presume a lot of our participants, just being more open-minded about how we approach things. And possibly I'm speaking very much to where Tracy was coming from, but obviously within boundaries, within what the organization requires. So an awful lot of what Derek is speaking about and the data, and then that compassionate piece. So I just think it's been really informative and really helpful. And just knowing that whatever decisions we make now, once we're open about them and explaining, they may well change. So let's not allow ourselves to be tied up in that. And me being the real pragmatist, I just love Derek, like lead-in times being shorter. We have shown that we can transform. Let's do that, and let's not be tied up. And I suppose, Denise, we were talking about HR and it being a key, but obviously leadership is huge to that. So some of the things that you refer to, particularly those three, the capacity to respond, recover and thrive. And I think we've spoken through all of that. So excellent. Thank you so much, all of our speakers and our facilitator. Excellent. I have to thank my colleagues who have been in the background and the foreground of ensuring this has run pretty seamlessly, and there's a lot of work and stress in that. I don't know how Sinead keeps her head in breaking out the breakout rooms. Thank God there is a reason why I don't do the technical supports of the wheel. So Sinead, Lauren, Femi, Johnny, Emily, all working in the background. Thank you so much for that. And obviously to our participants, events like this can't happen without people being so willing to engage in this online format that is different, but I think we have shown that is impactful and just different, but equally as good. And then in terms of any of the information and the links, we will be pulling all of those together, and there will be an email sent on to you. And do check out our website in terms of our summit series that I mentioned at the beginning, tomorrow and next week, and a lot of our other HR advice and support. And that is it. Thank you all so much. And we are now all well within our time. I think we gave ourselves a generous amount of time to ensure that we wouldn't go over, but it is lovely to finish that little bit earlier. So thank you very much, Denise, for your very effective timekeeping. And we'll all now click our red buttons and leave. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.